Part 1. The betrayal. I stood outside our bedroom door, my hand gripping the manila envelope I just picked up from the hospital. Inside were all the medical reports for my wife's latest round of IVF. A March wind rattled the antique window at the end of the long hallway, a gust of early spring chill that was nothing compared to the ice forming in my heart. Chloe, this round of IVF has to have taken, right? I mean, after the last 2 miscarriages. Felicia's voice drifted through the partially open door, laced with the casual intimacy of a best friend. I'd been about to walk in, but her words stopped me cold. The 2 miscarriages, a pain so deep it felt like a part of me had been carved out with a dull knife. The first time, Chloe had cried until she nearly passed out, and I held her in a deserted hospital corridor all night. The second time, she had looked at me with a pale face and whispered, "I'm sorry," and all I could do was swallow my own grief to tell her it wasn't her fault. Of course. The first 2 were Logan's. I had to terminate them myself. This one is Leo's. I would never get rid of this one. Chloe's voice was light, airy, a shard of ice that shot straight through my eardrum. My fingers clenched, crushing the corner of the envelope. For a second, the hallway lights seemed to burn with a blinding intensity, and a roar filled my ears, like a million bees taking flight. I bit down hard on my lip, tasting the metallic tang of blood, but I felt nothing. "Chloe, aren't you terrified Logan will find out?" Felicia asked. I held my breath, pressing my back against the cold wall, as if it were the only thing holding me upright. A cold sweat had soaked through my shirt, sticking it to my skin. Of course I'm scared. I worry all the time. But with Mom, Dad, and Leo all helping me cover it up, he should never find out. My parents? My vision narrowed. An image of my mother's loving smile and my father's stern, caring gaze flashed in my mind. They knew. They were part of this. A sharp pain lanced through my chest, and I realized I hadn't been breathing. I let the air out slowly, my lungs feeling as if they were filled with lead. God, Logan is the real victim here. You guys took away his chance to be a father twice, and now you're cheating on him. It's just tragic. Felicia's words were like a scalpel, twisting in my gut. I shut my eyes. The scene after the second miscarriage played out in my mind. My mother at Chloe's bedside, holding her hand and murmuring reassurances. My father clapping me on the shoulder, saying, "You're both still young. You'll have more chances." And Leo, the boy I'd always treated like my own brother, standing in the corner, his face impossibly pale. I didn't want to. Every time I was pregnant, Leo would get physically sick, so depressed he couldn't function. Mom and Dad begged me. I had to get rid of them. This time, all 3 of them convinced me. Leo's health was getting worse and worse. It was the only thing they asked for. What could I do? Besides, this was IVF. I didn't physically cheat on Logan. My body is still his. We can have our own baby later. Chloe's words slithered into my ears, each one coated in poison. My nails dug into my palms, but I felt no pain. So that was it. That was it. The first 2 times weren't accidents. They were murders. And my own dear parents, to protect Leo, had helped kill their own grandchildren. The hall light flickered. I looked up, but my vision was blurry. I hadn't realized my eyes had filled with tears. I wiped my face harshly, forcing myself to be calm. Poor Leo. It must be so hard for him, growing up without parents, always being so frail. Felicia's voice faded as my mind drifted back 20 years. I was the scion of the Hayes family, a name that carried weight in New York's most exclusive circles. When I was a boy, my mother consulted a spiritual advisor who told her my life force was too aggressive and that I needed a companion born on the exact same day to balance it. I was 8 when my mother brought a frail, skinny boy home. "This is Leo," she'd said. "He was born on the same day as you. He's here to be your friend." The advisor had said our energies were compatible, that he could temper my hard fate. I remember being thrilled to finally have a playmate. Leo was smart and quiet, and he quickly won over the entire family, including my perpetually stern father. "Logan, you're the older brother. You need to let Leo have his way," was my mother's constant refrain. "Logan, look at the trouble you've caused. Why can't you be more responsible, like Leo?" was my father's daily lecture. I was never jealous of Leo. Truly, not even when he soaked up most of our parents' attention, not even when he seemed to effortlessly get everything I ever wanted. He was my brother, and I had promised to protect him. And now, A bitter, silent laugh escaped my lips. The irony was suffocating. The person I treated as my own flesh and blood had conspired with my wife and my parents to weave a massive web, trapping me in the center to be devoured. Isn't Logan due back soon? Felicia's question yanked me back to the present. Yeah, he went to the hospital to pick up the IVF results. He should be home any minute. Chloe's voice held that familiar warmth that now made my stomach churn. I took a deep breath, schooling my features into a neutral mask. I placed the envelope on a console table in the hallway, making just enough noise to announce my presence, then pushed the door open. "I'm home," I said. My voice was so steady it surprised me. Chloe shot up from the bed, a perfect smile plastered on her face. "Honey, you're back." She hurried over, moving to give me her customary hug. I took an instinctual half-step back, then covered the awkward movement by adjusting my cufflink. Yeah, I had to stop by the office after leaving the hospital. Something came up. My eyes flickered over to Felicia, who was perched on the edge of the bed, looking uneasy. "Did you get the report?" Chloe asked, her eyes shining with a light I once mistook for love. "It's on the table in the hall," I said flatly, watching her every micro-expression. She rushed out, and I heard the rustle of paper. When she returned, her face was beaming with a joy she couldn't hide. "The doctor said everything looks perfect. It's going to work this time." I looked at her slightly rounded belly, where a life was growing, a life that wasn't mine. A chill crept up from the soles of my feet. I just nodded. "Good. Logan, you look pale. Are you tired?" Chloe reached out to feel my forehead. I turned my head slightly to avoid her touch. "Maybe a little. You two catch up. I have some work to finish in my study." Before she could reply, I turned and walked away. The moment the study door clicked shut, my legs gave out. I slid to the floor, my breathing ragged and heavy as black spots danced in front of my eyes. I bit down on my fist to keep from making a sound. The last 3 years flashed through my mind. Chloe's joy when she told me she was pregnant the first time, the soul-crushing grief of the first miscarriage, her soft reassurances that we're still young, her careful anxiety during the second pregnancy, the utter despair of the second loss. It was all a lie, a performance. And my parents. I pulled out my phone, staring at the family photo on my lock screen. My father, stern but proud, stood in the middle. My mother smiled gently. Leo and I flanked them, Chloe's arm looped through mine. We looked like the perfect, happy family. My finger swiped across the screen, and the photo vanished, replaced by my banking app. As the acting CEO of the Hayes Corporation, my personal assets exceeded $1 billion, and a family trust was worth 10 times that. The numbers, once just a scorecard for my work, were now the most powerful weapon in my arsenal. "Since I wasn't in any of your choices, you won't be in any of mine," I whispered to myself, my voice chillingly calm. I pushed myself up and walked to the window, looking down at the manicured gardens of our Greenwich estate. 20 years ago, on that very lawn, I met Leo for the first time. He was wearing faded hand-me-downs, hiding behind my mother like a frightened deer. "I'll protect you," 8-year-old me had promised. Today, 28-year-old me decided to personally destroy the man I once swore to protect, and everyone else who had betrayed me. The setting sun painted the garden in shades of blood. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I rarely used. "Mr. Peterson, I need you to draft several documents for me immediately." My voice was cool and controlled, as if I were discussing tomorrow's weather. After I hung up, I dialed another number. "Dr. Evans, regarding my wife's IVF treatment, I have a few questions I'd like to ask you in private." By the time I finished the last call, the study was shrouded in darkness. I didn't turn on the lights, letting the shadows swallow me whole. In the blackness, a plan began to take shape, meticulous, ruthless, and absolute. A soft knock came at the door. "Honey," Chloe's gentle voice called out. "Dinner's ready. Your parents and Leo are waiting. Be right there." I answered, my tone impossibly serene. I stood, straightened my suit, and flashed a smile on my reflection in the dark window. The game was just beginning, and this time, I wouldn't be the lamb led to slaughter. I opened the door. Chloe stood there, beautifully illuminated by the hallway light. I once loved that face more than anything. Now, all I saw was a mask of deceit and betrayal. "Let's go," I said calmly. As we walked down the hall, I glanced at the family portrait on the wall. We were all smiling, From this day forward, that smile was nothing but a hollow, sarcastic joke. In the dining room, my parents were already seated. Leo was helping my mother arrange the silverware. He looked up as we entered and gave me that familiar, innocent smile. "Logan, Chloe, we were just waiting for you." I stared at this brother of mine, born on the same day as me, and suddenly saw that his eyes held the same light as Chloe's, calculated and fake. "Right," I said, pulling out a chair. My gaze swept over each person at the table. "So, what's the good news we're sharing tonight?" My mother beamed, her eyes darting to Chloe's stomach. "The best news is that we're about to welcome a new member to the family, isn't it?" "I suppose so," I said, raising my wine glass. The light from the crystal chandelier refracted through the glass, stabbing at my eyes, as sharp and merciless as the truth that had pierced my heart. In this elaborate play of betrayal, I had lost the trust of my wife, my parents, and my brother. But soon, they would understand that they were about to lose me forever. I'm not the forgiving type. I took a sip of red wine. The bitterness spread across my tongue. Part 2. The truth. The first hint of dawn was breaking as I stood, fully dressed, at our bedroom door. Chloe was still fast asleep, her position on her side accentuating the slight curve of her stomach. I stared at the life growing inside her, a life built on a lie, my fingers tightening and releasing at my sides. On the nightstand was a photo from our honeymoon. Chloe was laughing, her eyes crinkled into crescents. Who would have known that those same eyes held not love, but a cold, hard calculation? I closed the door without a sound. The silence in the mansion was absolute, broken only by the soft click of my dress shoes on the marble floor. The household staff hadn't started their day yet. The entire Hayes estate was submerged in a false tranquility. The Maybach started with a near-silent hum in the garage. As I pulled out of the main gate, the security guard, surprised, gave me a sharp salute. Usually, I'd still be asleep at this hour. "Mr. Hayes?" "So early?" he asked, jogging up to my window. "An urgent matter," I said, rolling down the window. The morning air was damp with dew. "Don't tell Mrs. Hayes I left." The guard paused for a fraction of a second, then nodded. "Understood, sir." The car glided onto the main road. At 5 a.m., the streets of Greenwich were unervingly empty. I opened the windows, letting the cold air rush in, trying to blow away the fragments of conversation that echoed in my head. The hospital parking garage was vacant. My footsteps echoed as I walked toward the elevators, which took me directly to the 12th floor reproductive medicine center. Dr. Evans's office was at the end of the hall. I checked my watch, 5:40 a.m., too early. But I didn't mind waiting. Today, I had all the patience in the world. I sat on a bench in the corridor. I reached inside my suit jacket for my cigarettes, then remembered the hospital's no-smoking policy and shoved them back with a surge of irritation. The numbers on the digital clock on the wall changed slowly, each second stretching into an eternity. At 6:15 a.m., footsteps finally sounded down the hall. Dr. Evans, in a crisp suit, appeared and froze when he saw me. "Mr. Hayes? I need all the records for Chloe's IVF treatment." I cut him off, my voice rougher than I expected. "And every medical file you have on Leo Hayes." Dr. Evans's expression shifted from surprise to confusion, finally settling into one of professional caution. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. "Mr. Hayes, has something happened? All of our procedures adhere strictly to national guidelines. Besides, these records are confidential. Releasing them would be against regulations." I stared into his eyes and saw a flicker of hesitation. Dr. Evans was in his early 50s, a respected name in his field, recommended by our family's primary physician. I remember my father had made a call to him personally when we first chose the clinic. "Doctor," I said, stepping closer, closing the distance between us. "I just want the facts. As the husband and as a significant donor to this hospital, I have a right to know the truth." I pulled a debit card from my wallet. "Here's $200,000. The PIN is 6/8. When this is done, there will be another 300,000. Dr. Evans swallowed hard, his eyes darting behind his glasses. He glanced down the empty hallway and lowered his voice. "Mr. Hayes, this isn't about money. It's a violation of protocol. 500,000. Right now," I added a second card. "Or tomorrow morning, I can have some friends from the state medical board come and audit every single procedure your center has performed for the last 3 years. You and I both know that even the most pristine process can't stand up to that kind of scrutiny. The color drained from his face. He took the 2 cards, his fingers trembling slightly. Give me 30 minutes. Half an hour later, I walked out of the hospital with a thick envelope. The sun was bright now, almost painful. I got in the car, but didn't open the files immediately. Instead, I made a call. Mark, you free? I need you to look at something. Mark Shun was my college roommate and now a department head at New York Presbyterian. His apartment was only a 10-minute drive away. Mark's door was unlocked. When I walked in, he was in the kitchen making coffee, the rich aroma filling the living room. What brings you out at this hour? He asked without turning around, his voice thick with sleep. And what's with the ominous-looking package? I tossed the envelope onto the coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud. Help me with this. Mark came over with 2 mugs of black coffee, sliding one toward me. He didn't look at the files right away, studying my face instead. You look like you got hit by a truck. Close enough, I said, trying to smile. It felt like pulling concrete. Start with Leo's. Mark shrugged and opened the envelope, pulling out the first stack of papers. He read slowly, his brow furrowed. I watched his face, my own heart hammering against my ribs. These are his physicals and clinical record from the past 3 years, Mark said, flipping to the last page. He looked up at me. What are his specific symptoms? Supposedly, it's severe depression. It flares up every time my wife gets pregnant, I said through clenched teeth. Mark's eyebrows shot up. Depression? He quickly flipped back through the pages. There isn't a single psychiatric evaluation in here. Blood work, urinalysis, liver function panels. These are all standard checkup results. He pulled out a single sheet. Look at this. A report from last October. Aside from mild iron deficiency anemia, which could just be from being a picky eater, every single one of his markers is normal. Depression? That's bullshit. My fingers tapped an accelerating rhythm on the coffee table. Mark kept reading, then froze. Wait, what's this? He leaned over. It was a semen analysis report dated 3 months ago, exactly when Chloe began her IVF cycle. Sperm motility, normal. Concentration, normal. Mark's voice trailed off. He looked up at me, his eyes full of a complicated pity. This is the sperm donor for the IVF. I heard my own voice, distant and hollow. But it's not mine. Mark's face went rigid. He put the file down, took off his glasses, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Logan, what the hell is going on? I didn't answer. I just handed him Chloe's IVF records. Look at this. Mark scanned the documents, dense with medical jargon, then stopped short. Here, the embryo source is listed as husband's sperm, but the donor ID record shows. His voice cut off. Shows what? I pressed, even though I already knew. Mark took a deep breath. The source ID number matches the one on Leo's report. Even though I was prepared for it, the confirmation felt like a punch to the gut. I shot up from the couch and went to the window, gasping for air. Outside, the city was fully awake. Traffic flowed, pedestrians hurried along the sidewalks. Everything was normal. Only my world had just been torn apart. Logan. Mark came up behind me, but he didn't know what to say. I'm fine, I said, turning back, forcing myself to be calm. I need you to write a professional assessment. I need a report on Leo's health status and a confirmation of this donor match. Mark hesitated. This gets into some serious medical ethics territory. $5 million, I cut him off. Isn't your medical aid project in Africa short on funding? Mark stared at me for a long moment, then sighed. Give me 2 hours. It was after 9 when I left his apartment. The sunlight was blinding. I put on my sunglasses and walked to my car. My phone vibrated. It was Chloe. I stared at her smiling face on the screen for 3 seconds before declining the call. On the way to the office, I got a text from my lawyer, Mr. Peterson. Documents are prepared. Ready for your review whenever you are. Peterson's office was on the 58th floor of 1 Vanderbilt, with a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the heart of Midtown. He stood as I entered. Mr. Hayes, you look. The documents, I said, cutting him off and sitting down in the client area. Peterson pushed 3 folders across the table. I opened the one labeled divorce agreement first. The terms were dense, but the core was simple. Chloe, as the party at fault for adultery, fraudulent termination of pregnancy, and conspiracy to commit paternity fraud, would walk away with nothing and waive all rights to future claims. Pay special attention to Article 7, Peterson explained, pointing to a paragraph. It explicitly states that the fetus she is carrying has no biological relation to you, and that Leo Hayes will assume all parental and financial responsibility. Legally, this is a bit proactive, but after consulting with several family law specialists with sufficient medical evidence. It's fine, I said, flipping to the last page. I paused over the signature line. I'll sign this after the other two are finalized. The share transfer agreement was thicker. It detailed the transfer of my controlling 51% stake in the Hayes Corporation to my old college friend, David Shun, a brilliant financier I trusted implicitly who is now on Wall Street. The agreement stipulated that I would retain full operational decision-making power. David would act only as the named owner. Mr. Chun has already signed, Peterson said. He asked me to tell you he's ready to move whenever you are. I nodded. My father thought he had the family business firmly in his grasp, but he never knew that my grandfather, on his deathbed, had transferred the bulk of his shares directly to me. He had left my father only 10%, a 10% stake that I now knew was intended for Leo. The last folder was the Family Trust Distribution Agreement. I was the sole administrator of the multi-billion-dollar Hayes Family Trust. The new agreement completely restructured the payouts. Leo was removed entirely. My parents' monthly allowance was cut from $1 million to $10,000. Chloe and her unborn child were explicitly excluded as beneficiaries. About this part, Peterson hesitated. Are you certain about your parents? $10,000 a month in New York. It's enough for an ordinary life, I said coldly. They'll have to learn to adjust. Peterson looked like he wanted to argue, but simply sighed. It will take 3 business days to process all the changes. Would you like to sign now? I picked up the pen and signed my name on every required line. The scratch of a nib on the paper was unnervingly loud, like a knife slicing through skin. After the last signature, I looked out the window. The sun glinted off the glass facades of the surrounding skyscrapers. I thought of the reports I'd seen this morning. Leo's clean bill of health, the date on the semen analysis, the embryo match record. Every document was a monument to my own stupidity. Mr. Hayes, are you all right? Peterson asked gently. I stood up, adjusting my suit. Never better. As I was leaving the building, my phone buzzed again. It was my mother. Logan, are you coming home for dinner tonight? Your father has something to discuss. I stared at the message for a long time, then typed back. Yes, Mom. I'll be there on time. I looked up at the sky. It was a brilliant, cloudless blue. A perfect day for revenge. I got into my car and placed the file containing a copy of Mark's impending medical report into my briefcase. Tonight's family dinner was going to be spectacular. Part 3, the last supper of the night, was as black and thick as ink. The grandfather clock in the foyer was striking 9 as I stepped into the Hayes mansion, the deep chimes echoing in the vaulted space like a grim omen. The living room was brightly lit. Chloe was on the sofa, flipping through a magazine. She looked up when she heard the door, her face arranging itself into that familiar, gentle smile, the one that used to be my sanctuary and was now my personal hell. Honey, you're back. You're so late tonight, she said, setting the magazine aside, her fingers drifting unconsciously to her stomach. My gaze flickered to the other end of the sofa, where Leo was curled up, scrolling on his phone. He was wearing loose-fitting loungewear, his face so pale it was nearly translucent. He noticed me looking, immediately put his phone down, and offered a weak smile. Logan, work, I said curtly, dropping my briefcase on the console table by the door. The metal latch clacked loudly against the marble top. Footsteps approached from the kitchen. My mother emerged, wearing an apron, her hands dusted with flour. Logan, you're home, just in time for dinner. Her smile was wide, crinkling the corners of her eyes. I made Leo's favorite tonight. Lobster. I loosened my tie, my throat tight. My mild shellfish allergy was a well-known fact in this family. But ever since Leo's depression started, my mother insisted the doctor had recommended he eat more seafood for the trace minerals. The irony was suffocating. The entire household's menu had been rearranged for a man who was faking an illness. In the dining room, the crystal chandelier illuminated a feast of seafood, steamed king crab, lobster thermidor, scallops with garlic and vermicelli. Not a single one of the spicy, flavorful dishes I actually enjoyed. My father was already at the head of the table, polishing a silver fork with a pristine white napkin. "Didn't we just have a celebration last night?" I asked, pulling out my chair with a grating screech. "What's the good news today?" "Ever since Chloe got pregnant, it's been one good thing after another," my mother said, scooping a piece of crab onto Leo's plate, her eyes shining with an unsettling brightness. "And Leo's health is improving so much. This baby is such a blessing." The silver fork in my hand began to bend. I stared at Chloe's stomach, where a child who shared none of my blood was being hailed as the family salvation. "Is that so?" My voice was terrifyingly calm. "This isn't the first pregnancy. Weren't the first two babies blessings?" The table fell dead silent. The color drained from Chloe's face. Her trembling hand knocked over a water glass, the sound of it shattering unnaturally loud in the silence. Leo erupted into a fit of coughs. The knife in my father's hand clattered against his plate. My mother's mouth hung open, as if she'd been strangled. "Cough, cough." Leo's coughing broke the spell. A sick, reddish flush appeared on his pale cheeks. "All babies are blessings. My health improving has nothing to do with it. Logan, don't overthink things." I calmly sliced into the lobster tail on my plate, watching the pinkish-white meat separate under the blade. "I don't have time to overthink. It was just a passing comment. No need to be so sensitive." "All right, that's enough. Let's eat." My father's deep voice carried its usual authority, but the bulging vein in his temple betrayed his agitation. The rest of the meal passed in a strange, heavy silence. The clinking of cutlery was the only sound. Leo picked the crab meat my mother shelled for him. Chloe kept her head down, her long hair hiding her face. I chewed my food mechanically, tasting nothing, and lost my appetite after a few bites. Suddenly, my father put down his utensils. The clash of metal on porcelain made everyone look up. "Logan," he said, dabbing his mouth with his napkin, his voice back to its usual steady tone. "Now that Leo's health is better, I think it's time we found him a significant role at the corporation, perhaps head of a division, or let him run a subsidiary to get some experience. It would take some of the pressure off you." I slowly swallowed the food in my mouth and took a sip of water. It was lukewarm, just like the carefully controlled emotion I was displaying. "According to the tradition grandfather established," I said, setting my glass down with a soft click, "family members start at the bottom to avoid developing an entitlement complex. You did it, and I did it." I looked at Leo, who was watching me with those wide, pleading eyes. "If Leo wants to start in an entry-level position at one of our companies, he just needs to let me know. I'll make the arrangements." My father's face darkened. "That's not some written rule. Every situation is different. Besides, he's the same age as you. You're already running the entire corporation. I'm sure Leo is capable of the same." "He's right," my mother chimed in, nervously twisting her napkin. "You can't trust outsiders. In the end, it has to be family. Brother helping brother." I let out a cold laugh, spinning my fork between my fingers. "Leo is an outsider. He has the family name, but not the blood." The tines of the fork glinted in the light. "I'm a CEO now. We do it my way. If you want a job, he starts at the bottom." Tears immediately welled up in Leo's eyes, splashing onto his plate. He bit his lip to keep from sobbing, but his shoulders shook uncontrollably. He looked like a drenched puppy. "Damn it." My father slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes jump. "Leo is your brother. He's the son we've raised for 20 years. He is just as much my son as you are." I watched the performance with cold detachment. Leo's tears, my father's rage, my mother's anxious hand-wringing. What a perfect little family unit. I was just the inconvenient intruder. A grown man, nearly 30, crying like a child. I said, pushing my chair back with a loud scrape. "I'm the CEO. It's my call. Anything else? If not, I'm done here." "There is one more thing." My father's voice suddenly became quiet, a calm more dangerous than his shouting. "You and Chloe have been married for 4 years. You have a child on the way. And Leo is finally well enough to start his career." My heart sank. My hand instinctively went to the inside pocket of my suit, where the share transfer documents from Peterson were resting. "What I mean is," my father said, looking me directly in the eye, "it's time you transferred some of your shares to Chloe and the baby. The air in the room seemed to solidify. Chloe's head snapped up, a strange, unreadable emotion in her eyes. Leo stopped crying, tears still clinging to his eyelashes. My mother looked nervously from my father to me. "And how do you propose I do that?" I heard my own voice, sounding as if it came from a great distance. My father took a document out of his briefcase and slid it across the table. The sound of paper gliding over wood was deafeningly loud. "I know your grandfather transferred all of his shares to you before he passed. You currently hold a 51% stake in the company," my father said, his tone as casual as if he were discussing the weather. "I propose you give 20% to Chloe and 10% to the child, which Chloe will hold in trust." My fingertips went cold. The plan was diabolical. If Chloe controlled 30%, and then "I hold 10%, my father continued, confirming my suspicion. "I'm getting older. I can't contribute much to the business anymore. I intend to give my shares to Leo." My mind raced. If I agreed, my stake would drop to 21%. Chloe and Leo together would have 40%, a controlling alliance. And the ultimate insult. My father was giving his entire inheritance not to his biological son, but to his adopted one. "You'll still have 21%. You'll still be the largest single shareholder," my father added, as if he were granting me a favor. I picked up the proposal. The papers trembled slightly in my hand. The terms were all there, a formal share transfer agreement already drafted, waiting only for my signature. "I will decide how to allocate my shares after my child is born. If the child is mine, I would give them everything," I said, placing the document back on the table. My voice was chillingly calm. "Your shares are yours to do with as you please. I have no say in the matter." A flicker of surprise crossed my father's face. He clearly hadn't expected me to be so composed, nor had he caught the implication of my words. "If the child isn't mine, it gets nothing." "Is that all?" I stood, adjusting the cuffs of my suit. "I have to get back to the office. I won't be sleeping here tonight." Chloe's lips parted as if to speak, but she just lowered her head, her fingers twisting her napkin into a knot. Leo stared at me with red-rimmed eyes, like an abandoned pet. My mother looked conflicted. My father's face was a mask of thunder. I turned and walked out of the dining room, my footsteps echoing down the hall. Behind me, I heard my father's muffled roar, "You ungrateful son of a bitch," followed by the sound of my mother's sobbing and Leo's attempts to comfort her. Outside, the night air was cool and crisp. I took a deep breath, the cold air clearing my head. My phone vibrated. A text from Peterson. "All documents have been notarized. Ready to be executed at your command." I looked back at the brightly lit mansion. At the second-floor window, my father's study. It was in that room, 20 years ago, that my grandfather had put the original share documents in my hands and told me the future of the Hayes Corporation rested on my shoulders. The old man saw it all coming. I remember my grandfather's voice, raspy but firm. "Your father is too sentimental, easily manipulated. That boy Leo, he's not as simple as he looks." I was only 18 then. I didn't understand. Looking back now, I realized how sharp my grandfather's instincts had been. I got into my car and pulled out the signed share transfer agreement. My signature and David's were already there. 51% of Hayes Corporation would temporarily be in his name. But now wasn't the time to tell them. I wanted to watch their dreams turn to ash with my own eyes. I started the car. In the rearview mirror, the Hayes mansion glowed like an island in a sea of darkness. I knew that fortress, which seemed so impenetrable, was about to crumble from within. And it was a fortress I no longer had any connection to. The car's display lit up with an incoming call. "Mark Chen." I answered. "Logan, the medical report is in your email," he said, his voice tired. "It includes the donor match confirmation and Leo's complete health history." "Thanks," I said. "One more thing." Mark hesitated. "I pulled Leo's full medical history for the last 5 years. The interesting part is that every depressive episode lines up perfectly with your wife's pregnancies, and what? And every recovery coincides with a large wire transfer from your parents' private account to his." My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "How large?" "Never less than $200,000 a pop." I let out a cold, humorless laugh. So that was it. It wasn't just an act. It was a business. I hung up, turned the car around, and headed for the city. There was so much to do, so many details to finalize. But in that moment, my mind was perfectly clear. I felt a strange sense of liberation. They thought they were playing a brilliant game of chess, but they never realized I had already knocked over the board. The city lights glittered outside my window like a galaxy of fallen stars. Behind every light was a story, and my story was about to reach its climax. Part 4. The truth tears us apart. The 3-day wait was a slow, agonizing torture. I stood before the front door of the Hayes mansion, my thumb rubbing the leather of the briefcase in my hand. Inside was everything I needed to bring this house of lies crashing down. The early summer sun was blinding, reflecting off the white marble facade with a cold glare. I rang the doorbell instead of using my key. The small act felt ceremonial, a declaration that, as of today, I was no longer a part of this family. The door opened. Chloe stood in the entryway, holding an untrimmed white rose. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her, creating a soft halo. The image once would have made my heart ache with love. Now it just filled me with disgust. "Honey, you're back. It's been days," she said, her voice as gentle as ever, as if nothing had changed. A thorn pricked her finger, and a tiny bead of blood appeared. She reflexively brought her finger to her lips, a small, endearing habit that now only reminded me of the 2 children she had murdered. I looked past her and saw Leo standing nearby, holding a pair of floral shears. The space between them was unnaturally close. His fingertips were dusted with pollen. A perfect domestic scene, if you ignored the fact that the baby growing inside her belonged to him. "Are Mom and Dad home? If they are, tell them to come downstairs. I have something to say to everyone," I said, my voice sounding distant and unfamiliar. I walked past them and sat in the single armchair in the center of the living room. The leather groaned under my weight, as if in protest. Chloe's smile froze. Her fingers worried the stem of the rose. "Is something wrong? You seem—" "Logan, they're upstairs. I'll get them," Leo interrupted quietly, refusing to meet my eyes. He hurried toward the grand staircase, the back of his white linen shirt wrinkled, in the exact spot Chloe always used to smooth out for him. Once Leo was gone, Chloe approached me, trailing her signature jasmine perfume. "What's happened? You don't seem like yourself." She reached for my hand, but I dodged the contact, pretending to adjust my cuff. "Let's wait for your parents," I said, my eyes fixed on the elaborate floral arrangement on the coffee table. The vibrant blooms were meticulously trimmed and arranged, a perfect, man-made illusion of harmony, just like this family. A jumble of footsteps sounded from upstairs. My father appeared first, dressed in a full suit, as if ready for a board meeting. My mother followed, her casual clothes still bearing a smudge of flour from the kitchen. Leo trailed behind them like a guilty child. "Leo said you needed to see us. Is this about the shares we discussed?" my father asked, his sharp gaze landing on the briefcase in my lap. His first words to the son he hadn't seen in 3 days were not of concern, but of business. The detail was another dull twist of the knife in my already shredded heart. "Sit down," I instructed. "I have a few things to say." I tapped my fingers on the briefcase. "I'm going to make 4 points. Don't interrupt me. You can speak when I'm finished." My father frowned, but took the armchair opposite mine. My mother perched nervously on the sofa. Chloe sat beside her, wringing her hands. Leo chose the farthest chair, looking like he was ready to bolt. "First," I said, pulling a folder from the briefcase. The rustle of paper was loud in the silent room. "I have sold my shares in the company. Hayes Corporation will now be known as Apex Holdings." The statement was a bomb. My father shot to his feet, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "You did what? Without my approval? That company is my life's work. Are you trying to kill me?" His roar made the chandelier tremble. I calmly laid the share registration document on the coffee table. "It's a done deal, legally binding." My fingertip rested on the bright, red notary seal. Besides, there were my shares to do with as I pleased. I looked up, meeting my father's bloodshot eyes. "And let's be honest, this company was mine and grandfather's life work. In a few years you were CEO, profits plummeted. I was the one who brought it back from the brink." My father's hands began to shake. He snatched the paper, his eyes scanning the text. You, His voice became a hoarse whisper, as if his throat were closing up. My mother rushed to his side, but he shoved her away. Second, I continued, my voice chillingly steady. I am divorcing Chloe. She will leave with nothing. Chloe let out a short, sharp cry, like a wounded animal. She slid from the sofa onto the rug, her manicured nails digging into the thick pile. Logan, why? Everything was fine between us, she sobbed, tears streaming down her face. I'm carrying your child. Chloe is pregnant with your baby, my mother shrieked. How can you talk about divorce? Do you have someone else? And she will not leave with nothing. She is the only daughter-in-law we will ever recognize. I already know, I said, my voice cutting through the noise, that the child in Chloe's stomach is not mine. It's Leo's. The words hit like lightning, silencing the room. Everyone froze. Chloe's tears hung on her eyelashes, her lips trembling, unable to form a word. And I know that my father, my mother, and Leo all knew. You were all in on it. Logan, no. I never betrayed you, Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible. It was IVF. We're still young. We can have our own baby next. Have another one? A cold laugh escaped me, the sound sharp and cruel. So you can all conspire to get rid of that one, too? How could you say that? We all love this baby. We would never harm it. Chloe cried hysterically. I pulled the medical records from my briefcase and slammed them on the table. I know about the first two. I know you terminated those pregnancies. You murdered your own children. My finger pointed first to my father, then my mother, and you murdered your own grandchildren. No, that's not what happened. The three of them shouted at once, their voices a bizarre, desperate chorus. My mother lunged forward and grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my flesh. It was because Leo was sick. He was so depressed. We had no choice. Tears ruined her makeup, making her look old and pathetic. He's sick and depressed. So what does that have to do with my child? I shook her off. Why should my child have to pay the price for that? How ridiculous does that sound? I won't sign. Logan, I won't divorce you. Chloe scrambled on her knees to my feet, clutching my pant leg. Her tears soaked the leather of my shoe. The once proud daughter of a wealthy family was now as pathetic as a beggar. Third, I said, forcing myself to remain calm as I pulled out the family trust documents. Given your role in the murder of my children, I have restructured the family trust. I read the new terms aloud. Effective immediately, Leo and Chloe are no longer beneficiaries. Father and mother will each receive a fixed stipend of $10,000 a month for living expenses. Any major medical costs will be paid directly from the trust to the hospital. You can't do that. Leo leaped from his chair, the meekness gone, replaced by a snarling rage. I'm a part of this family. I smiled at him, the way one might look at an insect struggling in a spider web. I can, because I'm the sole administrator of the Hayes Family Trust, I said, my voice soft and dangerous. And because you don't have a drop of Hayes blood in you. In fact, you helped destroy it. Leo's face contorted. He turned to my father. Dad, say something. But my father didn't seem to hear him. He sat frozen, staring at the share transfer document as if it were written in an alien language. And fourth, I said, pulling the last envelope from the bottom of the briefcase. A little parting gift. I slowly unwound the string closure. Leo was never sick. He has mild anemia. His hospital stays were for simple vitamin drips. And he has never, ever been depressed. Impossible. My mother screamed. I took him to the doctor myself. Stop slandering your brother. I emptied the contents of the envelope onto the dark wood of the coffee table. The white pages scattered like a small avalanche. The records are all here. See for yourselves. The scene that followed was a grotesque farce. My father grabbed the reports, his eyes flying across the medical terms. My mother's trembling hands fumbled with Leo's physicals. Chloe crawled over and picked up the semen analysis, then let out a blood-curdling scream. Leo stood rooted to the spot, his face cycling from red to white to a deathly gray. How can this be? My mother mumbled, the papers slipping from her grasp. My father's head snapped up, his eyes blazing with a fury I had never seen before. Now, you bastard, you lied to us. Suddenly, Chloe launched herself at Leo, her nails raking across his face. You monster, Because of you, my babies never even had a chance to see the world. Her voice was a raw, inhuman shriek. Leo stumbled backward, knocking over an antique vase. The sound of shattering crystal mixed with the screams and curses, creating a twisted symphony. Enough! My voice cut through the chaos. You can have her dog-eat-dog fight later. I pulled out the final document, the divorce agreement. Chloe, you can sign this now, or you can wait to talk to my lawyer. Chloe collapsed on the floor, her makeup a streaked mess. I won't sign. I'm not signing. She crawled toward me, her dress dragging through the broken glass. Logan, I'll get rid of this baby. We can start over. We can have our own children again. I stepped back, away from her outstretched hand. Then so be it. I placed the agreement back in my briefcase. My lawyer will be in touch. I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, I could hear Chloe's hysterical sobs and the sound of my parents screaming at each other. I'm not coming back to this house again, I said, my hand on the doorknob. I took one last look at the place where I had lived for nearly 30 years. Goodbye. The door closed behind me, shutting out the noise. The sun was still bright. The roses in the garden were in full bloom. Nothing had changed, but I knew that the House of Hayes, once so solid and imposing, had just been reduced to rubble by my own hand. I got in my car, but didn't start the engine. In the rearview mirror, the mansion looked like a perfect silent dollhouse. No one came running out. No one tried to stop me. The realization sent a sharp pain through my chest, followed by a strange, profound sense of relief. My phone vibrated. A text from Peterson. All filings are complete. I replied with a simple, good. Then I added, handle the divorce signing with Chloe. I looked up at the house one last time. A curtain moved in a third-floor window. I could just make out my father's silhouette standing there. We looked at each other from a distance for a few seconds. Then I hit the gas and drove toward a future without them. Part 5. Farewell, and beginning the May rain came without warning. I stood by the coffee shop's large window, watching drops trace paths down the glass, blurring the world outside. This little cafe in a quiet corner of the city was where Chloe and I had our first date. Now, it would be where our marriage ended. The clock on the wall struck 3. A small bell above the door chimed. Chloe walked in, her hair damp from the rain. She was thinner than I'd ever seen her. The beige trench coat that once fit her perfectly now hung loosely from her shoulders, and her face was a pale, translucent white. "Are you okay?" she asked, sitting opposite me, her voice as soft as a whisper. "Never better. Eating well, sleeping well," I said, swirling the coffee in my cup. The words tasted like a lie. I'd barely had an appetite for weeks, relying on whiskey and Ambien to get through the nights. The waiter brought her usual order, a caramel macchiato, the pattern on top as perfect as the facade she used to maintain. She wrapped her hands around the warm mug. I noticed the wedding ring on her finger was gone, leaving only a faint, pale band on her skin. Silence stretched between us. The drumming of the rain, the whir of the espresso machine, the low murmur of other patrons. Every sound was amplified. Chloe's fingers traced the rim of her cup. Her nails were short and bare, stripped of their usual immaculate polish. "My lawyer said you agreed to sign the papers," I said finally, breaking the quiet. "Did you bring them?" Her hand flinched, sloshing coffee onto the table. She fumbled for a napkin, her movements clumsy and uncharacteristic for the woman who was always the picture of grace. "Logan." She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. "Can we not do this? Please." Tears welled. "I got rid of the baby. I moved out of the house." Her voice broke. "We can start over. Just the two of us." The rain intensified, hammering against the window like 1,000 tiny fists. My eyes fell on a fresh mark on her wrist, the telltale sign of a hospital bracelet. She'd actually gone through with it. I never meant for any of this to happen. The tears finally fell, one splashing onto the agreement beside her mug, blurring the ink. They pressured me every time. I kept thinking about Leo, no parents, always so sick. I felt sorry for him. Her fingers twisted together until the knuckles were white. I told myself we were still young, that we could have our own baby later. Her confession was a dull blade, twisting in wounds that had yet to heal. I looked at her trembling shoulders and remembered the first time I saw her on campus. She had been trembling then, too, nervous after winning a major debate competition, her palms sweating despite her confident performance. So, I lost my mind. I did these horrible things. She suddenly reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Her palm was cold and damp. I'm so sorry. Logan, please, just forgive me this one time. Her touch was electric, and I recoiled instinctively. The small movement seemed to shatter her last piece of hope. Her shoulders slumped, and her entire body seemed to deflate. There's no us anymore, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. The moment you chose to destroy our child, you guaranteed this ending. A clap of thunder rattled the cafe, and a flash of lightning illuminated her ghostly pale face. Her lips trembled, but no sound came out, only a soft, choked sob. The cafe's sound system switched to a new song on the piano. Clair de lune. Ironic. A waiter approached to offer refills, saw the scene, and quickly retreated. Chloe pulled an envelope from her purse and pushed it across the table. Here, the signed agreement. Her fingers lingered on the paper for a second, a final farewell. And this is yours. Inside, along with the divorce papers, was my wedding ring. The diamond I placed on her finger, which once sparkled so brightly, now looked as dull as a piece of glass. Logan, I'm sorry. She stood up abruptly and gave me a deep, formal bow, her hair falling forward to hide her face. I am so sorry. Her voice was broken, the last words nearly inaudible. She grabbed her bag and fled, knocking over a chair in her haste. The bell on the door clanged violently. For a moment, the sound of the storm rushed in, and then it was gone. I sat there, staring at her coffee cup. The caramel pattern had melted, dissolving like our sweet, manufactured life. The waiter came over to clean up. Sir, can I get you anything? He asked cautiously. Another black coffee, I said. No sugar. It arrived quickly, the bitter taste spreading across my tongue. I opened the folder. Her signature was on the last page, the script shaky and almost unrecognizable. A small, tear-shaped stain had dried beside it, like a permanent scar. Outside, the rain stopped. The sun broke through the clouds, reflecting brightly off the wet pavement. I took the envelope and left the cafe. The bell chimed softly behind me, like a final sigh. Years later, I saw my parents' names in the society pages of the Wall Street Journal. It was a small notice about Leo's death. He had jumped from a hospital window, having apparently developed genuine, debilitating depression. The article noted that his adoptive parents, Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, had refused to claim the body. A charity had handled the burial. In the accompanying photo, my father was a stooped, broken figure, looking 20 years older. My mother's face was a blur behind a black veil. I heard about Chloe through a mutual friend. She never went back to her family. Rumor was she moved to a small country in Europe and vanished from the social scene. Someone thought they saw a woman who looked like her in Paris, painting by the Seine. Another claimed to have seen her at a private mental health clinic in Switzerland. They were just whispers. As for me, life found a new, quiet rhythm. My wife now is a woman I knew in college, kind, resilient, and she never asked about my past. We have twins, a boy as bright as the sun and a girl as calm as the moon. Sometimes, when they're curled up on my lap listening to a story, my mind drifts to the two children who never had the chance to be born. On nights when I can't sleep, I walk into their room and watch their small chests rise and fall in the moonlight. I remember the cafe in the rain and Chloe's last shattered, "I'm sorry." That's how life is. Some mistakes can never be fixed. Some wounds never fully heal. All you can do is carry the scars and build a new life on top of the ruins. Right now, I'm standing at the window of my office, watching the city lights come on below. The Apex Holdings logo glows against the night sky. The once mighty Hayes family is now just gossip, fading into memory. My phone buzzes. It's a picture from my wife. Our two children, their faces illuminated by candlelight, about to blow out the candles on a cake. It's my 33rd birthday. I shut down my computer and grab my coat. It's time to go home.